Welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I am Joe Sanok, your host. Welcome to the show. This entire month, we are doing Marketing Month. Last month, we did the Even Better Year series where we talked about that idea of small steps in the right direction. That when we're in a new year, oftentimes it's all these big, ridiculous goals that we give up by the beginning of February. Well, we are trying to make this an even better year. So go back and listen to that series. Had some amazing content. We talked about healing trauma and embracing the Asian American identity. We talked about evidence-based content for your clients. We talked about psychedelic medication at the end of your life. We talked about non-obvious thinking. So many things that are just great steps in the right direction. Well, today on the show, we have Gee Ranasinha, who is the CEO of Kexino, which is over the past 16 years, he has helped over 400 startups and small businesses in over 20 countries grow awareness, reputation, trust, and sales. He has been one of our Ask the Experts in our membership community, has been one of my go-to marketing guys. And when it comes to just how we're going to have this conversation, today's a little bit different. He has presented and put together a presentation for us that's going to be interactive, that is going to be guided rather than the kind of typical just conversation that we have. So I'm super excited about this. I don't really even know what I'm in for, but Gee, welcome back to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Great to see you again, Joe. Hope you've been well. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this. I love how you are bringing your teaching, which you do as a professor, into what we're doing here on this with this audience.
Well, I think the more people can be aware and educated about the basic principles, which is basically what I'm going to be talking about today, the basic principles of marketing and the stages involved and the steps involved in sequence, and then being able to tailor that to your particular type of practice. The more aware you are of that process, hopefully the better final result you can get, as well as spotting the let's call them snake oil sellers or charlatans, the people who, promise the world and deliver SFA, if you like.
Yeah, I've been there. Had many people who've given money to.
We've all had our fingers burnt on those sorts of things at some point in time. So, better to be forewarned and forearmed, and that's really what I'm trying to do here.
So awesome. Well, where should we start?
Well, we can start here. With I'll give you a short summary for those of us who weren't around for my earlier presentation. I give you just a 36,000 feet view of me, and then we'll dive into the steps involved in putting together a strong, solid marketing plan, which you can then build on from a tactical aspect. So that's what we're going to start with. So if we kick off here, you can see I've got it nicely branded for you, Joe, as usual. So unlike the previous presentation, my deck is going to be rather wordy, which is the polar opposite of 99.9% of my presentation. So I apologize in advance for that. However, I think since today is about execution, it's almost like I'm looking at it almost like a workshop. I don't think we can sort of do that without getting our hands dirty a little bit. Okay.
And Gee, before we go in too far, I do want to let people know that as we do this podcast, we are videoing Gee's screen. And our team is going to be putting this up on YouTube. So if you do want to see the slide deck along with as Gee is talking, feel free to bounce over to YouTube, look at our YouTube channel. That'll help you out if there's some visuals that you're like, oh, I can't hear that in the podcast. So just wanted to note that.
That's a good point. Okay, so blatant plug. Who am I? Who the hell am I? I've been in sales and marketing for the last 25 odd years, in organizations based in the US, the UK, Germany, and France, primarily in the B2B space, but also extensive experience in working with clients offering professional services rather than products, which I think makes me more than qualified to talk about how practitioners might improve their marketing effectiveness. I founded three small businesses myself. Firstly, I started an advertising and post-production company many years ago. Then I had a content localization agency, which was creating optimized in-language content for brands, publications, SEO, that sort of thing, which we sold 3 years ago. And of course, that brings us up to today, which is Kexino, where we are a small business marketing agency and behavioral science consultancy. We position ourselves primarily around strategy and behavioral science. We're 19 people in 9 countries. 9 of us are based in the US. The rest are in Europe, South Africa, Japan, and Australia. Like I said, 90% of our clients are in the US. You wouldn't have heard of most of them because they're, small solopreneurs or small businesses themselves. However, there may be some that you would have heard of. People like Adobe, Intel, Google, Fujifilm, Sony Entertainment, Timberland. And we've also been featured in a number of, well-known publications, websites as well. Finally, as you mentioned earlier on, Joe, I teach. You know what they say about people who can't do, they teach, right? So I do a lot of teaching. No, that is true. So I teach marketing and behavioral science at 2 business schools, which I've been doing for just over 10 years now. So that's me. So enough of that nonsense, and let's get on to what we're here about, which is how to fix your broken marketing. And, make no mistake, marketing is broken. And what we need to do is to look and to see why it's broken. And the reason why it's broken is primarily because people who think they're doing marketing are actually not doing marketing. They're doing promotions. They're doing communications, which is certainly part of marketing, but it's a tiny percentage of what marketing is actually about. And that's really what I sort of want to focus on. So taking a top level view, marketing consists of 3 stages. There's the diagnosis, there's the strategy, and the tactics. There's 3 stages, and they're always in that order. And even more importantly, each stage should take approximately the same amount of time. And the importance of knowing about these 3 stages and how it contributes to your marketing plan is that each stage is multiplicative. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if we screw up our diagnosis, it doesn't matter what we do from a strategy point of view. It doesn't matter what we try to do from a tactical point of view. We're not going to realize the expected results that we thought because we screwed up further up, okay? Multiply anything by 0, you're always going to get a 0, right? So that's why I wanted to say that these 3 areas are multiplicative, they're not additive. So it's important that we get each stage right. And that is one of the reasons why marketing's so hard, really. So if we start with diagnosis, what is diagnosis? It's very, very simple. Diagnosis is just like when we're talking about healthcare diagnosis. Okay? Before we can come up with the answer, there's a bunch of questions we need to ask, right? We need to work out what the hell's going on. We need to find out what's working, what's not working, find out what and where the pain points are. And I think this is absolutely crucial because if you don't know the problem, then you can't come up with a solution. You have to have insight to drive your approach, and that insight needs to come from what you could loosely call data. but it's certainly asking the right questions. Let's call it research. Because otherwise you're not marketing, you're just running around waving a wet finger in the air, right? A diagnosis is a very practical thing. It's not rocket science. There's nothing precious about it. It's quite basic. It's low down, dirty, hands in the mud kind of work. Now, there's a standard way of generating the data and coming up with the insights from that, which is usually from some kind of research, what we would call qualitative research, which is interviews, focus groups, ethnography, whatever makes sense. And we do this to inductively understand the market and the business's place within that market. Once we've done that, we channel those insights, the qual, as we call it, into quant, as we call it, quantitative data, which manifests itself in, for what we're talking about, is it's usually some kind of survey with a list of questions. You've seen this sort of thing. They'll ask you a question and it's like, how much do you agree with this statement? And you've got like little points from like 0 where you totally disagree with it up to say, 5 or 10 where you really strongly agree with it. And there may be a sort of don't know, not sure option there as well. We've all filled in those sides of surveys, I think. And you put that survey to a representative sample of the market, and that's pretty much as standard as it gets, really. Now, there's other things you can do. You can partner with publications, industry groups, get involved with conferences, seminars. But, regardless, at a pinch, at the lowest level, most businesses, I think, can certainly get away with just doing the quantum, hopefully the qual, if they know what they're doing. And once you've done that, you move on to segmentation, targeting, and positioning. But before we can get into that, there are, let's say, 8 questions. Eight questions or 6 questions. 6 questions, sorry. 8 is the number 8 figures later on. There are 8 questions that you need to be able to ask yourself. Sorry, there's not 8, 6 questions that you need to be able to ask yourself, to have the answers to, in order to begin that marketing strategy on which you can then build your tactical plan. So, you need to know the top 3 pains that your ideal client faces. We call them ICPs, which is Ideal Client Profile. Marketing is full of 3-letter acronyms, as I think most of these sort of jargon-based industries are. So it's coming up with the top 3 pains of your ideal client faces. And more importantly, the everyday frustrations that's caused by those pains. How do they manifest themselves in the lives of the people that we're trying to target? The next question are the triggers that prompt our target client to go and actually seek out a solution to the problem that we're looking for. Okay? Next question. Why solving these problems is transformative for the client? And the best way of asking that question to a representative sample is to say, what about if you do nothing? What's at stake by going with the status quo? Because as you know, if you're in 2 minds about buying something, there's a pretty good chance that if you're in conflict about whether to go and buy something or not, there's an overwhelming desire to just stick with what you've got, right? You're too afraid to make a wrong decision, so you have an almost analysis paralysis by not being able to make that decision. So it's important to know what that status quo situation is to be able to communicate that in your marketing materials, right? After that, we need to know how they behave, how they consume content, the information channels that they trust and look for when they're researching solutions like ours. Where do they go? What websites do they visit? What journals do they buy? What podcasts do they listen to? Of course, they listen to the Practice of the Practice podcast, but after that, what else do they listen to? Right? Fifth question is, how do they think about our category? How do they view the market and the competitors in that category? I think, your industry and my industry shares some concern and trepidation for new market buyers. They don't want to have their fingers burnt. They've heard horror stories. And so at the beginning of any customer interaction, what we're all selling is the same thing. We're selling trust, right? Because if people don't trust you, then they won't take the next step. So I think there's an important point to understand how they think of us so that we can either address those obstacles up front in our communication or deal with them in some other way. And then finally, it's to understand their selection process. What does it look like? What is, in marketing speak, we'd call it the buying cycle, but I don't think it's really relevant when we're talking about services such as practitioners. But what are the steps involved to purchase from getting to the awareness stage through until the point of actually getting in touch, finding out more, and hopefully making that first appointment? What does that all look like? And it's good to map that out, to sort of schematize. Is that even a word? I don't know. I just made it up. If it isn't a word, it's a word now.
I love that you bring up that, because so often what happens is, maybe a client sees you on Psychology Today, they go to your website, they then click to schedule an intake. And rather than it just go to a schedule, which is what your prompt says, schedule an intake, it goes to a contact us form. They then have to wait 48 hours to a week if they even get a response back, or they have to call a phone number, versus how do we remove all of that friction, to be able to have, just to be able to have, a very clean, easy process. And so I love that you bring that up as part of that diagnosis phase.
Well, I think it's very important that we do our homework before we start rolling up our sleeves and get involved in all of this tactical stuff. And for me, what we're talking about is effectiveness rather than efficiency, which was the subject of our previous conversation. And effective marketing starts with strategy. Yeah. While many people jump straight into the tactical stuff. Which, strategy always comes before tactics. This is the number one reason why so many small business owners and solopreneurs fail at marketing, because they jump straight into the tactical stuff without having done any strategy. So, what do I mean when I say strategy? Strategy is where we evaluate the targeting choices we have, and we come to some decisions on who we're going after. And then we have to position ourselves to those targets and define what the objectives are going to be. Strategy is as much about what you say no to as what you say yes to, if that makes sense, right? So I'm going to go deeper into strategy in a minute, but once you've got to the strategy and you've mapped that all out and you've done your diagnosis and you're looking, pretty good, the third stage, as we had on the earlier slide, are tactics. And the tactics are split into what I believe still to be 4 executional elements. Some people know these as the 4 Ps. Now, the the concept of the 4 Ps has been around for a long time. The Ps that I'm talking about are product, even if it's a service, right? Pricing, placement, and promotion. Now, 4 Ps has been around a long time. I mean, it's since like the 50s. It originally came up. It was thought of by a gentleman by the name of Neil Borden, who was an advertising professor at Harvard. And over the years, the marketing industry has evolved and people have added other Ps. So today, some people say there's 5 Ps or 6 Ps or 11 Ps, or, you know, regardless of whether there's 5, 6, there's too many Ps. It's almost painful by the amount of Ps. It's so painful, it's like there's cystitis going around. There's just Ps everywhere, okay? But regardless of how many Ps, the concept is the same. It's a framework that we build our marketing strategy upon. Now, even though there are 4 clear elements there is somewhat of a grey area of separation between them. They do overlap somewhat, but that's absolutely fine. If we just go through the thought processes and look at these things in isolation, even, as I said, if they overlap, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But like I said, the promotions part, the comms part, communications, is the stuff that people who don't know very much about marketing jump into first, because they don't know what they're doing, right? But they know what they see as an output. And this is probably what the current situation where marketing is seen as almost like a sales support function, right? You know, it's considered in the same way as, excuse me, as writing blog posts or shouting at people on social media or email blasts about nothing in particular, about trade shows and conferences and stress balls and lanyards and tote bags and that sort of thing. Now, you know, all of that sort of stuff is part of marketing, but it's a very, very small part of marketing. Where we need to start is at the first one of those Ps, which is to understand the product itself, even if in our case it's usually a service. So we need to define the product and its qualities and introduce it to our audience, like the basic marketing of a product. So who needs what we provide and why? And what do we do that others can't or don't? And there needs to be some kind of hook, some kind of differentiation and indeed distinctiveness, which we will touch upon later on. So I'll go into that a bit more detail. So that was the first P. Second P is pricing. So pricing is obviously the amount that our audience will be willing to pay for what we're offering. It's important here to link the price point to the products, or in our case, services, real value as well as its perceived value, which are 2 separate things, whilst also considering external influences, okay? You know, why do we set our rates at the level we do? How price sensitive is our offering? How does price sensitivity change if and when we change the profile of people that we're targeting? Depending on the audience, our hourly rate could be seen as too expensive or far too cheap. And both of those extremes can be detrimental to closing business. Yes, price is important, but what's more important is the value, the perceived value of what is being offered, which doesn't have a direct straight line correlation between price. Next one, placement. This is really a cop-out. I think basically they were looking for another P, because the way I see placement is really distribution. So it's the consideration of where what we're offering should be available and how it's displayed. Okay, so if it was a physical product, it may include like online stores, bricks and mortar retailers, that sort of thing. Okay, now for service providers, placement also includes featuring or advertising our services in the right way, through the right media, using the right communication channels to get to the attention of the right target audience. That's also availability. That's also distribution. Okay, picking the right channel and the right way to articulate what we're selling can make or break how we're perceived within the market space. Right? And then the final P is promotion, which is what most people who don't know about marketing think marketing is. And the goal of promotion is to communicate to our audience that they need whatever it is we're selling, and that it's priced accordingly. So promotion encompasses advertising, PR, the overall media strategy, video, podcasts, blogging, all of the tactical execution that we associate ourselves with marketing with an uppercase M. So, any questions so far? You've gone very quiet.
I mean, you're just knocking it out of the park. I think that, these are things that sometimes, when I think about the average clinician, they get out of grad school, right. They, maybe work at a nonprofit or CMH, they start their private practice. Somebody tells them you should be on Psychology Today. Somebody tells them you should do pay-per-click advertising. Somebody tells them, and oftentimes that somebody's me. I interview one guest that talks about pay-per-click, and then we don't always have that comprehensive plan. We don't even know the questions to ask. And so I love that you're starting with, okay, we need to have that strategy that's based on the diagnosis. It's based on that research of who we're trying to attract. And so I think it's bringing together a lot of these breadcrumbs that maybe we've felt or heard into a cohesive plan around what are we going to do here? Just understanding, okay, yeah, who are we trying to attract? How are we doing that? What do we know about them beyond just what we brainstorm personally, to get together with a yoga teacher. And if we're trying to attract yoga students to say, hey, I want to try to do better mental health in the community, is there a chance with your yoga studio to just do a roundtable discussion around mental health? And I hope to add value to those people, but also part of it is I want to learn how to better attract, good quality, yoga students into counseling. And so I think I like how it's bringing it all together in a way that maybe our audience hasn't heard before in as organized of a way.
So creating a marketing plan. What is marketing there to do? Marketing can only ever reinforce create and then reinforce memory structures in the brain, so that when people are looking for a solution that we offer, we are one of the providers that they'll consider. That's all marketing can do. Marketing doesn't generate demand. Marketing can't persuade. It can influence a decision, but it can't persuade, because persuasion is like coercion, right? While influencing is helping the prospect, the audience, make as an informed decision as possible by giving them information to make that buying process easier. And that's what we're talking for. And this, like I say, you can see the 8 elements. I was talking about 8 elements earlier on. I got it wrong. These are the 8 elements. So yeah, ignore that before. So what are we doing with creating a marketing plan? There are 8 elements. So the first element we've already discussed. We know exactly what we're talking about, right? It's diagnosis. qualitative interviews, quantitative NPS type stuff, diagnosis of the situation, taking the time to work out what's going on. Every business is different. Even within the category, you may be looking at a slightly different profile of audience, and so the way that you choose to message and articulate that value proposition may change. So it's very individual, it's very bespoke and unique to the business that we're talking about. Once we've done the diagnosis, we need to put together objectives. So we move to define clear and strategic objectives, not too many of them. And an objective needs to have a benchmark and it needs to have a goal. Okay, so it's not we need to get more inquiries or we need to rank higher on Google, because that's too intangible. Okay, rank highly on Google. If you go from page 5 on Google to page 1 on Google, but still nobody's calling you, then is it a real tangible objective that's making any measurable difference? It's not. Okay, so an example of a measurable objective would be to say, supposing we wanted to decrease customer acquisition costs by 10% by the end of the next calendar quarter. You see what I mean? So now we've got something tangible as a goal and a benchmark because we're comparing it against the previous calendar quarter. Okay? So we could say maybe we want to increase the number of qualified inquiries coming from our website's contact page. At the moment, we're getting on average 20, and we want to get to 30. And we want to get to 30 in the next 3 months. And we compare that to either the 3 months previously or this time last year, whatever makes more sense, because, you may have a seasonal business, in which case comparing it against the previous 3 months may not make as much sense. Okay? So it's all clear? So then we go on to stage 3 and indeed stage 4. I've put them together. The long and the short. So this is a combination of long-term mass audience brand building work, which shouldn't be targeted or restricted beyond whatever industry or category the business is in. Okay? And the reason is because 95% of your customers are what we call out of market. So we have the long-term brand building work coupled with short-term sales activation work. So this all sounds a little bit geeky, right? So hopefully let me explain it more effectively with some visuals. Okay, so the most effective marketing growth plan, is a two-pronged approach that combines two very different kinds of messaging, okay? Sales activation messaging and brand awareness messaging. So sales activation messaging, sometimes called direct response or sometimes called performance marketing, which seems a bit of a misnomer because isn't all marketing performance marketing? Nobody wants to do, non-performance marketing, do they? But sales activation stuff that's the sort of stuff that you do for a prospective customer when they are in the phase of looking to make a purchase. They've decided it's time to jump off that cliff, to move forward. And obviously, if you're into things like marketing funnels, this is at the bottom of the marketing funnel where the customer is in that decision-making stage and considering their choice and deciding whether what we're offering is appropriate for them and it matches with what they're looking to have, right? So examples of sales activation marketing are offers-based promotions, buy one, get one free, special price for a limited time, free delivery, basically all that Black Friday stuff that, we were seeing a few months ago and we'll be seeing again that sort of stuff. So it talks specifically to in-market buyers, okay? And the campaigns are built to focus on capturing existing demand from prospects who already understand the problem they have. They understand they have a problem, and now they're looking the best way to solve it. And now they're just looking for the best business practitioner to solve it for them, okay? So the messaging needs to be built to attract people who are actively looking to make that purchase for whatever we're selling through our marketing efforts. So that's sales activation. The other side of the coin is brand awareness marketing, sometimes called brand marketing, okay? So if you think about sales activation as being the quick movement from getting someone from the prospect stage to the customer stage, right? Bottom of the funnel. Brand building can be thought of as, think of it as the work that we do to get the customer's attention so that we are one of those providers for consideration, okay? So it's to have brand awareness marketing is to have the brand or the service front of mind when the prospect is finally ready to make a purchase, so that they think of us along with whomever else that they're looking to consider, okay? So it tells the customer exactly who we are, what we do, how we're different, the problem we solve, and basically it's anything that's customer-facing version of the company. You can think of it that way, really. So sales activation and brand building efforts are a partnership. It's not one or the other, it's both. Okay, both initiatives are important and need to work together at the same time. Just doing sales activation stuff on its own without having any time to sort of build the brand results in our audience not knowing about what we offer or who we are or who we can help. There's no, the thing I was talking about trust, we didn't have an opportunity to create that trust. Okay. On the other hand, if we just do brand building, it doesn't move our audience to get to the buying stage. So customers might know a lot about who we are, what we do, and why we are special, okay? But we need, let's call them traditional sales tactics to get them over their reluctance to buy. Cue complicated graphs. Never trust a marketer who doesn't have a complicated graph, okay? Actually, it's less complex than it looks. So if you, as you see, we've got a y-axis, which is the sales, and then we've got the x-axis, which is time. And this is basically sales activation. So if you think about, as an example of sales activation, if you think about it being advertising, for example, okay? So we spend a chunk of money on advertising. As a direct consequence, we get interest, we get eyeballs. Over time, that level of activation starts dropping over time, okay? Until it comes back down to a nominal level. And the only way to create that interest again is bang, spend more money. At which point it sort of gradually dims down. And that's what this graph is showing. So you have amount of sales based upon expenditure that diminishes over time and then increases again once you spend some more money. Okay? But the thing is, you're starting from scratch each time, right? Because there's no brand awareness involved, people who are outside of the consideration set at the time to buy don't know who you are. So what we do is we combine the two, brand building and sales activation, okay?
And Gee, will you describe, for thusthose that are just listening audioly, like the first graph versus this graph, since they may not be seeing it?
Good point. Good point. So the first graph, sales activation. Think of the sales activation as the shape of a sawtooth. Okay, so you create some noise, and you create some sales, and then it drops down, and it drops back down to virtually zero until you spend some money again. So you're just going up and down like the teeth, yeah, or the teeth of a saw. Okay. Brand building, on the other hand, is a longer term strategy. So you don't see any result tomorrow like you would with sales activation, okay? But it's a longer term strategy of creating a brand with which the customers will have an affinity. And you combine that with sales activation tactics that work to either get or keep customers buying, okay? But again, for those of you who are not looking at the slides, won't see this. The brand building graph starts lower than the sales activation, but over time overtakes the performance of sales activation because everybody in that category, in that market space, have heard of us. And even without us doing anything, remember us when they actually are in the point to buy. So that's number one. But number two is that brand awareness acts as a force multiplier for sales activation. So when we do spend money on ads, people have already heard of us. So the effectiveness of our sales activation work increases. Yes. So we get better bang for our buck. Not only that, but once we stop spending money on sales activation and we drop down to that threshold level, over time that threshold level increases because more and more have heard of us. Okay? So it works from a number of levels, and both of them feed off the other, if you take my meaning. Okay? So the investment share between sales activation and brand building, it depends on the business. It depends on there's no fixed rule. And it's something that we would experiment with for most clients to find what those magic numbers are. But as a basic guide, the recommended split is 60% brand awareness and 40% sales activation, which is probably the exact opposite of what most businesses do, right? Because they're looking for a quick win, but there are no quick wins, especially in the industries that we're talking about. These are decisions which are made over a long period of time, and showing up consistently in the places where our audience expect us to be is very much part of that marketing plan. Marketing is not a tap. It's not a faucet that you turn on and turn off. Not just because it takes time to grow, but also because people need to have heard of you before they'll buy from you. And there's also latency involved. The marketing effectiveness, the results that we're getting today are based upon what we've done 2 weeks, 2 months, maybe 2 years ago. And the results of what we're doing today may not be seen for weeks and months as well. There's a latency, there's inertia before we actually see results that needs to be factored in to all of these things. So marketing isn't a cost of doing business. It's as much part of the value creation chain as, having electricity in your office, right? Or having a roof over your head. It's an intrinsic part of the business. So hopefully that's clear about long and the short. That was stage 3 and stage 4.
Well, what 5. I love about it is even just as we think about with practice the practice, we're towards we're in Q1 right now. As we were identifying what our focus was for the year, and maybe this is partially because you've been talking in so many of our communities. The podcast we know is the number one driver of trust, with people that end up buying from us. And so over and over, when we've done surveys, we've brought in different consultants, the podcast is almost always, hey, that's where I got started. I binged it, I listened to it, I found whatever. And then our membership community, that's where people get the best results. And so it's this, we've been scratching our heads for years of like, we're getting great results over here, but people maybe aren't buying at the level we think, but then we're also not always putting money into the branding side of it. And I think that this really brings it together of those two goals for 2025 for us. It's like the idea of, pushing the podcast to as many people as possible. So 60% of our marketing budget kind of going towards that. And then 40% of it going to that direct sales helps me structure for the team, just thinking about like, how does that look for 2025 if we have these two goals to continue to grow the podcast and to continue to grow the membership. So it just like starts to bring it together as to like, oh, I think I see maybe why that hasn't been working, why we experience that heartbeat where, every single launch we do, it's within about 15 members about the same. We haven't broke through those next numbers. But I think what you pointed to is that we haven't been doing that awareness. So when it comes sales time, people are like, oh yeah, I know about the podcast. I know about Practice the Practice. That's a lot easier to then make that sale if you've been doing that concurrent branding with the marketing to buy something. So thank you.
I mean, it's logical when you think about it this way, I think, right? I mean, if you think about your own experience of how you're made aware of products or services in your own experience, right? You get to be made aware of these things, months, maybe years in advance, and you may not be at the right time to buy. But that threshold level of awareness needs to keep going, week after, well, maybe not every week, but certainly on a regular time frame, so that when people are in market, they think of you as opposed to thinking of somebody else. You look at the Coca-Cola ad. Look at the Coca-Cola ad that we had at Christmas. The holidays are coming at, right? They've run that, 30 years, 40 years, whatever. Okay? Now, does that make you buy more cans of Coca-Cola? No. What it does do is when you're in the soft drinks aisle in the supermarket and you see the red cans of Coca-Cola, you think, yes, I need to buy some Coca-Cola, because it's stimulating those mental pathways that have been built over years. The reason why you bought that crate of Coke isn't because of the ad that you saw yesterday. It's because of the ads that you've seen every week for the last 35 years, right? The Coca-Cola ads, they never say, go and buy a can of Coke. It's only 99 cents this week or something, right?
Yeah,
there's no selling there.
Yeah, I've been following kind of some of that story of Coca-Cola and how, just over 100 years ago, they realized that people were only buying Coca-Cola in the summertime and that their sales would dip.
Right.
And that's why they aligned so much with like the Santa Claus and all of that, was to have it become a year-round product. So at that point, it was like, go buy it in the winter. But now you're absolutely right that it's this ongoing branding.
And actually, they've been doing for so long because the original Santa Claus Coca-Cola ads, originally Santa Claus was wearing green. Did you know that? Santa Claus was dressed in green. Check this up, Google it, I'm not lying. Santa Claus was dressed in green, and what they did for an ad is they had Santa dressed in Coca-Cola red. And over time, because it's so ingrained into our memory structures, into our culture, everywhere now sees Santa in red. Because originally, the whole idea of Santa and Christmas trees was, based in, pagan thinking of bringing the forest into the dwelling, right? So everything was based around forest tones, forest color palette. So you wouldn't see red unless it was a holly berry or something. So that's a case of where the advertising has been so persuasive and pervasive that it's actually come into the societal culture itself. Santa used to be green. There you
I love
go.
it. I love those cultural shifts that happen through, stories that we've never heard.
It's very interesting. I find it really interesting, those sorts of things. Okay, so number 5 is differentiation. There needs to be a tight, clearly defined, differentiated position at the heart of everything the business does. And why do we need to do that? So that whatever we create cannot be mistaken by the buyer of being somebody else. Okay, very simple. So how do we do that? It's actually quite simple. We talk to people. We talk to people who fit our ideal customer profile. But when I say talk, I mean actually talk to our ICP. So we speak to existing patients, clients, and we ask them these questions. If you remember back in the diagnosis phase, when we were doing the qualitative and quantitative research, we actually talk to our ICP. We ask them questions. We need to understand how they think about the problems that we're solving, what they see as the ultimate value that you're providing, and where and when are their pain points. Quite often, what we think we're selling is not what the customer is buying, right? And it's usually a very eye-opening exercise having those conversations to actually understand more about how what we're offering affects their daily life. Okay? Differentiation is extremely key. If we blend into the background, then from a customer's point of view, they can't see any difference between us and our competitor. And if they don't see a difference between us and our competitor, they don't have a measurable point of reference, which they're looking for. So they'll go to the next measurable point of reference, which is invariably price. So they'll ring around and go with the cheaper option because they don't see a difference from any other measurable metric that they see as having value. Yeah? So that's differentiation. Differentiation, very important. The next one, something maybe is unfamiliar to people, is a thing called codification. There needs to be a heavily and consistently codified execution so that everything is grounded and is distinctive in the minds of the audience. What do I mean by that? I mean that just by looking at a piece of customer-facing communication, even before they see the name of your practice, they know who you are, right? There's a look, there's a feel, there's a design language, there's a color palette, there's typography, but even in terms of tone of voice, how we choose to express ourselves is all part of this codification, and it also helps on the differentiation. The codification is important because we're not just trying to be differentiated, we're trying to be distinctive, which is something else. Distinct differentiation is how we stand out from what we're offering. Our offering, the way we choose to articulate our offering to our audience. Being distinctive is standing out about amongst all those other people who the customer sees as being inseparable in their own mind. So we're being distinctive. And I think one of the best examples of being distinctive and codification, certainly in the last decade, is McDonald's. So if I show you this, this was a billboard ad, okay?
Super, just for those listening, it's a super zoomed in French fries with a yellow and red packaging.
So you can just make out the yellow and red of the box of fries, okay? But there's no McDonald's logo. There's nothing talking about French fries. But based upon the colors, you instantly know it's a McDonald's ad. Another one which they did, which they ran as a campaign, was road signs. So you would have a billboard, and it would be a red billboard with just part of the golden arches, the McDonald's golden arches symbol, okay? It almost looks like a curve on a red background, and the only words are on your left. But you're driving along, you see the road sign, you instantly know what it's all about. There's no McDonald's logo, but you know it because McDonald's they're using what they call their distinctive brand assets. The way that they articulate their value using visuals, symbolism, and indeed audio. I mean, I won't try to whistle it, but the 5 tones that they have at the end of their ads when the I'm loving it tagline comes up, right? Instantly evocative of the brand. I think you'll agree, right? And this is another one which is on a bus shelter, which is talking about delivery. So you have some buildings and stylized, in at night. And again, you see part of the golden arches being used as that composition. You instantly know who we're talking about. Codification. It's forming those mental structures.
So, when you have a marketing budget like McDonald's, you can do this on a nationwide scale. If someone has a practice locally, like I think we can take these concepts and have it still be applicable to a under $1 million a year practice. Like what does that look like to apply this to a much smaller market and a much smaller business?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, the reason why McDonald's has multi-million dollar marketing budgets is because their target audience is international. Well, it's coast to coast, it's international, right? And the proportion of people based on the populace is a very high percentage. What we're talking about is we're fishing in a much smaller pond, which actually makes our job easier because it's much easier, obviously, to be a big fish in a smaller pond. What I'm trying to illustrate here is from the brand awareness stuff, it's creating that background noise, that background rhythm, cadence of who we are, what we do, who we do it for, and why they should care on an ongoing basis. Figuring out right at the beginning from the diagnosis stage what our ideal customer profile looks like. So, we may be talking to veterans. We may be talking to single mothers. We may be talking to people with disabilities. We may be talking to, whatever the demographic may be. Once we know those target audience groups, and it's usually plural, it's not just one, there's usually a few, right? But without spreading ourselves too thinly, when we look at the objectives, we pick 2, 3, 4, whatever the budget allows for, target audience groups, and we adapt our brand awareness execution to be in sympathy with the expectations of that particular target audience group. So you're saying different things to different people, even if what you're selling is the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So that was number 6. Now we move on to number 7, which is creativity. We need to increase the level of creativity in order to be at the heart of all of this, because otherwise it won't hit home, okay? Unfortunately, it's something that's lacking from 99% of the marketing that we see today. Unfortunately, there are too many ads or marketing messages that we can use interchangeably, okay? I mean, we've all seen them, wherever we're looking at ads. If you saw 2 ads from competitors in the same category and you covered up like the logo, quite often what they're saying, the communication could be used by either business, and that's a problem.
I love that you bring this up, G, because since the beginning of the podcast, I've joked that therapist websites almost always can be used interchangeably with like a mortician. Like there's hope for your family, and then there's this river going by a tree, and it's like, or like the pain isn't forever, and it's like, oh my gosh, can you be more specific?
Yeah, exactly. Is it a practitioner? Is it a mortician? Or are you selling Advil, right? It's we need to not just find, but have the conviction. I don't want to use the word bravery, because actually I think it's not bravery, it's sanity. To act, what gets noticed is not the middle of a bell curve, right? The action happens at the periphery. So we need to come up with creative ways of explaining and articulating what we do in new ways. That's language-wise, certainly visual execution-wise. It may be on, whatever particular dimension that makes sense for the type of customer we're looking to attract. And you find that out not by waving a wet finger in the air, but by asking customers who are always. I've been doing this 17 years and been doing it another 10 odd years before we started Kexino. Existing customers are only too happy to help. They want you to succeed. They want you to do well, right? So why not tap into that, unexhaustible list of intel, of insights that will power the way that you go forward to generate leads for your business. And creativity is important from the point of view of retaining a message, okay? So if you excuse me sort of teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here a little bit, right? But are you familiar with the idea of Gestalt theory? Okay? The brain, when left to its own devices, is looking to try to find order, patterns out of chaos, right? Because we need to compartmentalize and categorize things. We want to put round things in round holes, okay? Gestalt theory is making order out of patterns and chaos. So here's a little diagram which I use. So imagine a human brain is subjected to 10 marketing messages, okay? So assuming the human brain is not doing anything else apart from being receptive to these marketing messages, and there's 10 marketing messages, that means each marketing message has the same percentage of mind share, right? Which is, what's your maths like, Joe?
Wait, say that again.
It is 10%,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Each message has 10% of your mind share. 10 messages becomes 100%, right? The human brain has to remember 10 messages, but it doesn't. That's because that's not how brains work. We're always using heuristics, right? We're using shortcuts in order to make these, as well as we are influenced, cognitive biases, right? We've got all of that stuff going on top of all of this. So now imagine these 10 messages, which we can't really delineate between each other. Supposing one of those messages was different across a particular dimension. It stood out in terms of creativity, in terms of message, in terms of whatever, but it was clearly different to the other 9, okay? When that happens, what the brain does is it says, okay, you know what? What we've got are 9 messages that look pretty much the same, and we've got one message that looks very different, right? So what that means is, in terms of mind share, we've now got 50% of mind share, and everybody else is sharing the other 50%.
I love that.
Because our messaging is different. All of a sudden, we've gone from 10% of mind share to 50% of mind share, and we haven't actually spent any more money, really. We've just changed the way that we've chosen to articulate our message. Right? And finally, we come to number 8, the last stage in our marketing plan, which is channel. We see that creativity deployed across the most appropriate channels. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean digital channels. You mentioned you've talked about digital marketing in the past. It may well be a digital channel. But going into the exercise thinking that the only answer to a marketing problem is digital is actually doing a disservice, because there are plenty of other things that you could be doing which are not normally classified as being digital, but may work as well, or maybe even better, if you think of the creativity aspect, than what everybody else is doing. The example that I use here oftentimes is, would you believe, USPS mailers? Okay? You send something through the post, which, fewer and fewer people get anything through their physical mailbox nowadays, right? If it's been designed well, if it's been executed well, a piece of printed mail has a 100% open rate, which you can't say with any digital medium, right? Not only that, if it's been executed well, that piece of print may hang around in the person's home or office for hours, days, maybe even longer before it's finally filed in the round filing cabinet, if you know what I mean. The point is, we perceive printed mail as having more value than an email or a digital ad, because we all know that emails are free and digital ads are 10 a penny. So the very fact that we are conspicuous by our investment in our prospective customers gleans attention from those customers. And it puts the thought in their head, you know what? These people wouldn't be so confident about what they were producing if by the proof of their confidence in what they're producing is spending this money, right?
Okay.
It's something that we talk about in evolutionary biology called costly signaling, right? So if you think about bees and pollen and flowers, right? You see flowers which are very ornate in their design, and they're using all these wonderful colors, especially colors which are that fluoresce under UV light, because bees only see in UV, right? Now, a flower would not invest all of that, in inverted commas, effort to bring a bee there if the promise of pollen wasn't delivered to the bee, right? Because the bee would see, next time, the bee would see that flower and say, hey, I'm not going to fall for that one. I tried that last time. There was nothing there. I'm not going there again. And then over the course of evolution, right, that flower wouldn't exist, right? So costly signaling, the very fact that we are conspicuous by our presence across a medium that the customer sees as having a cost automatically increases the validity of our argument.
I love it. Now, before I ask the last question, I just want to make sure, are there any other final things you want to make sure you squeeze in before we dive into that final question I always ask?
No, that's really, it's coming to the end of our time. I've just got a slide here which is a summary of those 8 elements that form a marketing plan. We start with a diagnosis. We then define the objectives. We then split our marketing efforts between long-term brand building work and short-term sales activation efforts. We make sure our customer-facing value has differentiation so that people don't confuse us with somebody else. We use codification so that even before they see who it is, they know it's us. We use creativity to differentiate and create distinctiveness within our category. And then we use the most appropriate channels for execution that are in empathy with the expectations of our potential buyer. And that pretty much is it, Joe. That is my presentation.
Well, Gee, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Find out as much about what you don't know, right? You need to either find out as much about the strategic areas of marketing that drive the tactical, because otherwise you're going to be wasting a huge ton of money experimenting and, trying to catch a fly with chopsticks, right? You've got an unearthly huge mountain to climb that you're going to be doing again and again. It's Sisyphus, pushing the rock up the mountain again and again and again. So either find this stuff out yourself or align yourself with a experienced and reputable partner who you can work with over the long term. We're not talking about quick fixes here. It's a long-term partnership. And even if you start at a modest level and grow as the practice grows, you entrust that partner with handling these areas of your business, because this is not your core business. Unless you are educated or experienced in marketing, you shouldn't be doing this yourself, right? If you want to be a finance person, you have to pass exams to be a finance person, right? If you want to fly a plane, you have to spend so many hours in the air before they'll give you a pilot's license, right? If you want to be a surgeon, you have to spend 6-8 years medical school before they give you a scalpel, right? But for some reason, anybody thinks they can have a go at marketing. And then they try it, and they try to use shortcuts like, recipes or AI or whatever else that they think is going to get them to the end, get them to the promised land quicker. And it never, ever works. And then they see, oh, I tried marketing. It doesn't work for me. No, marketing does work for you. It's just that you suck at marketing.
Yeah. Well, Gee, if people want to connect with you, if they want to follow your work with your business, where should we send them?
Best way to find me and get in touch is on LinkedIn. Amazingly, there is only one Gee Ranasinha on LinkedIn, Joe. So you can quite easily find me. I'm sure you'll put my LinkedIn address in the show notes. Otherwise, obviously, get in touch from on our agency, which is Kexino, KEXINO.com. And let's have a chat. It doesn't necessarily mean we work together, but if I can help you dodge a bullet and keep you away from all of those snake oil sellers and charlatans who are promising the earth and don't deliver, then my work is done.
So awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show and being such a great expert in our membership communities and just hanging out today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me back.
Well, this entire month, we are talking marketing. And so if you have missed any of that, please go back, look at all the other episodes, and we have plenty that are coming up as well. Thank you so much for hanging out. We couldn't do the show without our amazing sponsors. Therapy Notes is the sponsor today. They're the best EHR out there. They will help you with all of your electronic health records. As well, they have HIPAA-compliant video, billing, and so many other things. Use promo code Joe at checkout to get a few months for free over at therapynotes.com. Again, that's promo code Joe at checkout. Thanks for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.